All right, here we go. We're going to get started. Thanks for your patience. We're about 5 minutes behind, but that's okay. Welcome to everyone who's joining us tonight. Thank you for being here. My name is Anna, and I work with the Regional Arts and Culture Council on our communications team. And it's my pleasure tonight to welcome you to Here and There, a mural conversation series. And we have two guests with us tonight that are going to introduce themselves. But I'm going to start with, oops, I'm getting some feedback. Let's see. I'm going to start by welcoming my colleague Salvador from the Regional Arts and Culture Council also. And so I think he'll be joining me here in a second. Here we go. Hey, Sal. Welcome. Okay, I think I will just make a few really quick comments about some technical things, which is mostly just to say that we hope that our audience will join our conversation tonight by asking questions of our artists. And so if you have a question for the artist at any point during this conversation, you're welcome to drop it in the comments. If you're watching on Facebook, in the comments, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can also comment on the YouTube video, just like you would if you have watched a YouTube video and you have a comment to say later. You can say it during this event. And I will be monitoring those comments and we'll collect the questions for our artists, and we will have some time at the end to do some Q&A. But I think that's my only technical note, except just to be transparent and say that this is the first time we're using this streaming service. And so please bear with us. If we have any little technical difficulties, we will let you know, but I think we're good. So Salvador, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks for being here. I'm so excited. You and I have been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, and I'm just thrilled that it's time.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Anna, and hello, welcome everyone. Yeah, this is a huge experiment for us, and it's going and it's happening, and that's exciting. And then on top of that, we have these both amazing artists, Alex and Katie, that we will be talking to very shortly. So that's also really exciting. Let's see here. So I just want to give a little introduction about the program Here and There and the series. So let's see here. This program series is offered by RAC's Public Art Murals program. I am part of the public art team at RAC, and my role is mainly managing public art projects and overseeing the murals program. And over the last, I would say about 5 to 6 years here at the Regional Arts and Cultural Council, we've heard directly from muralists expressing their desire to learn from each other in more intentional ways. And two things that stand out about that desire is a wish for more peer education, and then also creating and building relationships with other creatives. So in an effort to address and serve these needs, we've been brainstorming with community members, artists, and other RAC staff in the last year to figure this out. One of the ideas that has risen to the surface has been creating a space for muralists to have a dialogue about their practice, including how and why they do what they do as artists. On top of that, we thought it would be really interesting to have that dialogue take place between a local muralist and another muralist in a different part of the country. Technology has increasingly become part of our lives as a way to connect with each other, especially in this last year and a half. And we think there's something really special about having artists connect and converse when they might not have an opportunity otherwise. So tonight's conversation is the second of 3 conversations that have been happening since August and going through till October. Next month's final conversation will be on October 21st between local artist Darren Todd and Jake Fragua, who's based in Tucson, Arizona. We understand knowledge sharing is important, and we hope this series will be interesting and insightful for other muralists and to the overall public that acknowledges, appreciates, and engages with mural and art they experience outside throughout their day. So before I pass it on to Alex Chiu, I just want to share a little bit about him. Alex is a Chinese-American painter and muralist currently living in Portland, Oregon. His art is usually about ideas of family, community, unity, and the city of Portland. And over the past few years, he's worked with schools, businesses, and community organizations to paint murals. His creative process involves collaborating with community members and coming up with ideas for the mural and even painting the mural together. I'll just say personally, I have worked with Alex on a number of projects over the last few years, and to see his evolution as an artist has been a real treat. And we're excited that he is here along with Katie to share their stories and wisdom with us. So, without further ado, welcome, Alex.
Hi, Salvador. Thanks for the introduction. I really appreciate it. It's a huge honor for me to be able to speak to you guys, and I wanted. I'm excited to have a conversation with our guest. Her name is Katie Yamazaki, and I'm going to do a quick introduction from my perspective, and then I want to open it up for to give her a chance to talk about her own background as well. But from my perspective, so we have two kids right now, two daughters. We have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And when I started doing murals was the same time that we were trying to get children's books so that we could introduce different stories to our kids. And my wife's a librarian, so she's very specific about the books that she's looking for and the content. And she was looking for Asian American authors and illustrators. And then Katie was one of those authors, and she illustrates and writes her own books and their personal stories, and it was something that was really great for us to find. I can even show you. We have this book right here, which is really great. I got a chance to read it to the kids, and it's just a really nice family story. And I'm interested to ask her questions about the story too. But when I found out about her work, I also looked her up on Instagram and realized that she made fantastic, like brilliant murals, and I was really inspired by her work. And it just the way that she blends her style and this almost like fantasy storybook environment with it seems like very culturally rich imagery, people from different backgrounds. I'm really inspired by that. So I want to turn this over to Katie and give you a chance to introduce yourself a little bit and talk about your background in art.
For inviting me to join you, and thank you to our interpreters for being with us too. I really appreciate everybody. Um, Alex, I'm so flattered that you kind of found my work and found it to be meaningful, and I really am excited for this conversation. Just kind of between Asian American muralists, it's not something that happens every day. So I'm out here in Brooklyn, and I have been painting murals since about 2003. So now, time flies. It's, coming up on almost 20 years now. And I didn't grow up kind of thinking that I would become an artist. I wanted to be a social worker when I was growing up. I kind of grew up in a family of a lot of teachers, like some social workers, and there were also a handful of artists in the family. But I was a little bit intimidated by the artists, and I felt like what I wanted to do was something that had social impact. And so I went into I went into school and went into college thinking that I would, do a social work program. I had never studied art before, and I was kind of creative and always making things, but I just didn't really pursue that. I was kind of surrounded by, to me, one of the greatest murals, the Diego Rivera Detroit Industries mural at the Detroit Institute of Arts. That was kind of like a part of the regular landscape of what we did as kids, is we'd go to the museum and look at that spectacular mural. But it wasn't anything that I grew up thinking that I would do. Um, and I kind of thought that when I thought about art, I kind of thought like, well, I wouldn't want to go and just be in a studio by myself and then exhibit at a gallery where most people that I interact with on a day-to-day basis don't really have anything to do with the gallery world. It wasn't a world that kind of drew me in. Um, but when I was in college, I started taking drawing classes, and my drawings were awful. I mean, they looked like, I mean, they weren't, it wasn't that they were awful, it was that they were super beginner. They looked like the drawings that my 7th grade or 6th grade students would do. I remember doing self-portrait when I was like 20, and the head was like this big, and then the neck was so small, and then the shoulders, they looked like the work of somebody who had never learned how to draw before. And I would like put up my work on the wall for these critiques next to students who had like gone to specialized art schools and things like that. And it was like, it could be really humiliating, but I liked the way that it felt so much that I didn't mind the embarrassment. Like how much I liked it mattered more. I liked that it was
Mhm.
changing the way that I looked at the world, and I liked the way it was changing the way I experienced like light and shadow and just how the charcoal felt. But I still didn't really know what I would do with it. And then between my sophomore and junior year of college, I had the opportunity to intern with a children's book illustrator named Ed Young, who's like a pretty amazing children's book illustrator from China. He was a good friend of my aunt's who they were Tai Chi teachers together. They studied Tai Chi in the 60s together here in New York. And Ed has, he has illustrated at this point more than 100 books for children. And at that time in the 90s, it was like over 80. So my job was to archive all of his work. And so I kind of like went in, and what I saw was like all of these stories that don't usually get told, like just stories from China, these kind of stories of folklore, mystical stories, like kind of powerful stories of people who, look like my family, which was just something that we didn't experience. And I remember when I was a seventh grade student being in a U.S. history class, and on December 7th, on the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, my teacher said, "Oh, Katie, you're Japanese. Why don't you tell the class what happened today in history?" And I said, "Oh, and so I told the class about my family going to the internment camps, and how my great grandfather was arrested and went to a military prison because he was a he owned a vegetable market. He co-owned a vegetable market." And I told the class about, about what happened to over 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans. And when I was done telling the story, my teacher said, "That never happened." And I was like, "Yes, it
Mm.
did." He was like, "No, it didn't." And we went back and forth like that. But I was, a seventh grade student, not really brought up to kind of argue with my teachers. But it kind of made me think about who gets to tell their stories and who decides what stories get taught. It was kind of like this shocking um, moment, and it kind of got stuck in my mind, I think. And so when I was having this experience of working with Ed, I was thinking about, well, what are these other stories that, that I would like to tell, or that I wish would have been stories that I could have read when I was a kid. So I went to school. I ended up changing my major to art, and then I went to graduate school. But when I finished graduate school, I was like trying to sell a picture book, trying to be in the picture book industry, and I couldn't get any work. So my friend's mom was a public school librarian, and she said, "Why don't you come and paint a mural on my wall?" And I had just been in graduate school, but I had also just learned how to paint. I didn't paint in undergrad. I was like 25 and just starting out. And so I went to her library, and I painted this mural in this middle school. The first thing I did was drop a gallon of paint on a carpeted floor in the library, and
Oh.
that was like my first day of painting murals, and but it was such a wonderful experience because it was working with the people who I want to be around all the time, who are teachers and students, and custodians and administrators, and just people from everyday life, parents, people you encounter. To me, that's like the demographic. Just people you encounter in everyday life are my main, they're the main interest to me in terms of like who the audience is, so I love the interaction, I love the physicality, I love the kind of the scale and the way that that felt. But I just love that it was so immediate. It was like, here are these kids and these teachers, this is what the teachers are interested in, like using, this is how I can support them, support what they're teaching, this is what's going to support the librarian. I can actually be helpful here with art. And I think that was what I always wondered, was like, how can art be helpful? And so that was the first one. And I did a few murals, that were just, volunteer. They would give me like $50 to buy a few gallons of paint from Home Depot, and then I would just mix all the primaries, um, and it just, it became something that, what every time I would do a different project, it would be like a whole new set of stories. The second project I did was at a African centric elementary school in Detroit that was run by a former Black Panther. And so I would be painting, I did that over a Christmas vacation, and I would be painting, and he would just be sitting there just telling me all these stories, while I was painting. And then when I was done, they took the mural and they made a whole play about it, and then they wrote music about it, and it was like, what better, like, this is so interactive, and this feels really meaningful, like a meaningful application. And so then I was like tasked with the idea of like, how am I going to actually make a living doing this? So for many years I had like many part-time jobs. I have a lot of friends as a result of that, because I just had so many part-time jobs and every but yeah, that's how I got into murals. And if I had started publishing books right away, which was my goal, I probably would have never done the murals. So I'm glad, as much as like I thought, I would start publishing in like 2003 and like just have this like rich career as an illustrator, just making all these books. It didn't really get going until fairly recently. I had a book in 2007 and 2013, and then since 2018 it's been pretty regular, but that's almost 20 years, or 15 years after I started. So it took a while.
Yeah.
That's a long answer.
Well, I appreciate that. I feel like there's a lot of similarities in that story. I'm trying to pick out like what I relate to. Definitely, I also never thought that I was going to be a professional artist in my life. And it was always a side
Hmm.
hobby, but it was always something that I knew that I was good at. I always felt like I was good at drawing when I was in elementary
Yeah.
school. um that's like what I was known for. Like I met my first friend in first grade because he was like, "Oh, I like how you did your name tag. I like the colors that you used." And it really stuck with me and just made me feel like, oh, like I'm meeting people and interacting people
Yeah.
with people because of my artwork. So I felt
Yeah.
like that was important to me. And then I I felt like I was making it up as I went, and so it was so fun for me that I also had a lot of part-time jobs. So when I was in college, I worked at
Hmm.
a library, and then I was a barista, coffee barista for about 8 years. And then when
Hmm.
I moved here, I just picked up a bunch of part-time jobs. Like I worked at Sears, I worked at preschools, and then I started teaching after school programs and teaching art.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it always gave me the liberty to treat my artwork however I wanted to, and I had a lot of
Right.
freedom, and it felt
Right.
like I was able to really have be in my own world and create
Hmm.
like a fantasy environment. And at that time, I was a
Hmm.
cartoonist. But for me, I felt like there was a turning point. Like I had kids, and while after I had kids, I felt like I was stuck at home. So my wife had the real
Yeah.
job. She was like working at a college library, and then I was watching the kids, and then I was experiencing. So this is kind of recent history, but I was experiencing the 2016 elections, and then for
Oh
me,
yeah.
that was like a turning point where I
Hmm.
never really analyzed my artwork in a social context, but I was starting to paint people. Like I was starting to paint my children,
Yeah.
and then I thought that there was an importance in representing my family. And then I feel like during the election, the main issue that kept coming up that really bothered me was the idea of like anti-immigrant sentiment. And I think
Hmm.
for me, that really pushed me into like being like, oh, I need to analyze this. There's something about it that's important
Yeah.
enough that it's causing me distress. And that's kind of what pushed me into trying to like find my own community here, like cultural community,
Hmm.
and then understand
Yeah.
who I was as a person. I feel like for yourself, like I read your biography and you had talked about 9/11 and how that was a bit of a turning point for you. Like you had a relative who was
Yeah.
part of building the. I mean, I'll let you talk about it, but
Yeah.
can you relate to that sort of like
Sure.
when
Yeah.
yeah
Absolutely. Because I think that like, so 9/11 was like my second week of graduate school, or second day. I don't remember. It was right there. I just started graduate school, and my grandfather was the chief architect of the World Trade Center. So when that happened, um, it was like you start to really think about the symbols that you build, and what you're putting into the world. And like, this is a like much longer conversation just in terms of like his work and his architecture, but like it did make me think about like we watched, I knew growing up, just as a child, that was something that I was like proud of. You look at the New York skyline, it's like, that's so cool. My grandpa designed that. And then you kind of see, number one, the symbol that it becomes globally when you live in the United States, and how the US is seen by so many countries around the world, that this is the representation of like financial dominance and, power and everything like that. Understandable, and then you also see after the towers came down, how it got turned into a symbol of pro-war propaganda, of a war that none of us agreed with, that we were all super against. And so it made me just think about those symbols. But I think that like what I really was relating to what you were saying, Alex, and I see this in your work a lot, is that you get to a point where you feel like, especially when you're working in the public, you feel like the work is urgent. Like you feel like, so for the anti-Asian stuff, you feel like representation is actually urgent, and like how we see each other is really important. Like, if we can look at slide number 2, Chris, that would be great. So like this project I did in Philly, that's one, the next one. Yeah, this one. So this is a project in Philadelphia. Oh, go back one. Yeah. So this was a project that I did in Philadelphia with Philadelphia Mural Arts, and it was working with another teaching artist, and it just keeps wanting to move, but just think about the other one. But it was with a group of teenage boys who had been incarcerated. So they were in a correctional facility. Um, there we go. They were in a correctional facility outside of the city. Actually, there were a few correctional facilities that we were working in. But one of the exercises we did, so it's called Heavy Blanket, and it's kind of like about the heavy blanket, like the weight of racial hatred in this country. And so, like, there's text, I don't know if people can see it, but in the back it says, I am. And so we did this kind of exercise with them where it's like word bubbles. And one word bubble, they wrote, like, how do you see yourself? And these are all young men and boys who had been arrested and were like incarcerated. And so they're like, I am, good-hearted. I am serious. I'm a serious student. I'm a good big brother. I'm a loving son. I'm a good kisser. I'm a great dancer. I'm a DJ, whatever, like all of these positive ways that they see themselves and consider themselves. And then there was another word bubble that was like, how do people see you when they see you on the street, just walking down the street? What do you think people think of you? And it's like, I am dumb. I'm not going to be anything. I'm dangerous. I'm a killer. I'm, like really awful things in terms of how they experience the way people judge them. And it's like, it does feel urgent when it's like people are seeing each other so and like we're not seeing each other clearly, and I know it's much more complicated than that, but I do think that like an artist's job can be to kind of help people like see things in a different light. And I also think the power of a mural is that with a still image, it kind of is a different type of interaction than something like looking at something on your phone or whatever, because like when you're painting the mural, you'll have 1,000 conversations that you wouldn't normally have just by, I'm sure you have these two acts, like passerbys who walk by while you're working, or with the people who you're collaborating on, who are your partners in the process of creating the project. But I think that like what you're talking about in 2016 and then just up until recently, it is urgent. And I think that like the deeper you get into your work and the deeper you get into your community partnerships, it's like I remember doing a project in Rikers Island with a group of mothers who were incarcerated, and we could look at, Chris, if we could look at 11, that would be great. So I was working with their children in East Harlem, and then I was working with the moms. So the moms designed this mural for the kids, and it was like through a series of a lot of workshops. So I had worked with different mural agencies and organizations that had like enabled me to work inside of Rikers. This one though I did on my own. I like went and got my own permissions, and then I worked with like a domestic violence group that was doing advocacy work inside of this women's prison or jail. So that was kind of how I got in, but they would let me stay. My group was like probably 16 people, and the workshops were usually supposed to be about 2 hours, but they were so peaceful that a lot of the time they would let me stay for like 4 or 5 hours because everybody was just like in there relaxed, and it would be like the whole afternoon or the entire morning. And the like the letters that I would get, like every day, the women in the group, they were part of this domestic violence programming, but they would come with notes from other women in the facility who would be like, can I please join your group? Can I please join your group? And it's kind of like, you do feel that there's like an urgency to like letting people have a more human experience, and letting people be seen more completely. Um, so whether that's in murals, whether that's in television or movies, whatever, I think like for you and me, it's in murals, and I see like the pieces that you do in the schools, like kids walk into those schools and they feel like, oh, I belong here, and instantly, like, that's such a positive way to feel in a school, which, like, and it's not the way that a lot of people feel in schools. It's certainly not the way I felt in my school, where my teacher told me that, like, the history of my family didn't even happen. So I think that, like, all of these things, like, it's not everything, but it's something. I hate it when people will, like, Chris, if we can look at slide 5, that'd be great. Um, I did this long series from about 2003 to 2011 with a group of teenage, like young women of color in Brooklyn. And every year they would choose a different topic. And so they would choose the topic. Then my job would be to like build a curriculum around the topic, and like bring in guest speakers and everything. And we would do like a deep dive into that topic. And then the summertime, and this was their job, they were paid to do it. But the summertime, they were like, we would do a mural based on kind of our findings. This one was about like the exploitation and militarization of inner city youth at wartime. It was during the war in Iraq, and also about the experience of women in wartime, women in the military. But and now I'm like looping together so many themes. I'm like, what was I talking about? Um, but yeah, I think that like when it comes to representation and when it comes to these stories, it is like there is a certain urgency, and this is not going to solve all the problems. Like for this program in particular, people would love to ask, especially like people who would like donate to the mural organization. They would say, oh, like, can you tell me about how this changed somebody's life? And I'm like, well, they had a really great year. They had a wonderful summer, but they also like returned back to their like underfunded school then in the next year, and they also still live in a community that's like super disenfranchised. So it's, and they also
Mhm.
still don't have good health care. So it's like this is one piece of like a quilt, but it is like every other piece also needs to be taken care of, so I feel like it's like it's one thing, but also like it's part of a much bigger picture. It's like super long windy answers.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's really interesting to hear about the relationship that you've established with the people that you work with in the community. I'm super curious to know, because my work is about interaction with the community, and it is a lot of people
Hmm.
that I don't necessarily know right off the bat, and
Yeah.
I kind of have to develop the framework around that,
Yeah.
and it's really challenging to me. And every time I
Yeah.
do a project, I tell my wife it's like the hardest, most difficult project I've ever done in my life, and she's like, it's always going to be that way. Like, you're always going to take a project, and you're always going to say
Right.
it's the most difficult thing you've ever done.
Yeah.
Um, how do you approach proposing a project to the community, and how do you build a framework around it where you can build a genuine relationship and actually tell like an authentic story? Because part of it is like I kind of am jaded to this idea of like people are asking me to do a mural based on, we just want to see diversity, and it's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
oh,
No.
there's more
Yeah.
than that, and I know that there's more than that, and I know
Yeah.
that we can dig deeper into that, but sometimes I don't know how. And then like,
Right.
so I'm curious to ask you about how you establish
Yeah.
relationships with people.
Well, I think that that's such an important question, Alex. And I think that like the first thing is that whoever is commissioning the mural has to really be able to value the process. And by value the process, that means they need to not only fund the painting of the mural, but they need to fund your time to provide workshops where you're actually really getting to know the community. And it doesn't mean that you need to spend an entire year, but it does mean that like the whole, like the most important thing is like listening into what, if you're representing a community, it's like you have to get to know them. So like setting up these workshops that are also part of the budget. This is just like a practical side, but it's kind of like people want deep and meaningful murals, but they want you to paint them as an outsider coming in and just your general interpretation, but it's impossible to paint that project without knowing the people who actually live in that community, and so I think that like there needs to be like in my opinion, there needs to be a series of workshops where you have the time to establish a rapport enough so that like people feel like they are all this is for them and it's about them. You're going to leave that community and they're going to be left with the image. So it is so important that they feel like this is theirs. This is why murals don't really get tagged, when they're done kind of in collaboration with the murals, but or in collaboration with the community. But so I spend a lot of time in workshops, and like the workshops are drawing, they're writing, they're discussion, and it's a lot of listening because it is like the whole thing about people are the experts of their own lives. And if I am doing a mural about their lives, I am just there to listen, and then also like we'll do a lot of drawing exercises so that they can kind of like um, contribute visually. Some people are going to contribute more, verbally. Some people are going to contribute more in writing, but like a lot of people will have like a visual concept that is really communicating something important. And it may not be, they may not be like a visual artist. So it might not be like rendered technically well, but like it's showing something, so then it's like your job to like take that and incorporate it into the wall so that they know that that you heard them. And they also know that like um, and then it's like your opportunity to like in a very real way incorporate their imagery into a cohesive design. You kind of like take everybody's drawings and figure out a way for it to work together. Nobody wants a mural that looks like 35 people painted it, 35 different styles, but like um, but you can like I think that it's so much about listening. But I do appreciate the fact that a lot of people will be like, here's $2,000. I want you to do this 50-foot mural in 2 weeks. And it has to be about the community. And you're like, what can I learn about the community in two
Yeah.
weeks? And then you're painting out there, and people from the community are coming by saying, what are you painting? You're saying, I'm painting your community. And they're like, but
Mm.
like I don't you what do you know about my community? And it's not the big things that you can get off of like a demographic sheet or something. It's like the individual anecdotes and stories about that community. I mean, and also it will happen where like I remember I did one project in Crossville, Tennessee, which was like this little mountain town in the Appalachian Mountains, and like I went down there and it was a very Appalachian town, like very Caucasian, very Christian, very working class and poor. And I thought like, okay, this is like just how this is what the community, they kind of told me what they wanted. It was very historic. And then, but while I was painting it, like by the time I was done, I was like, oh, I would have done a completely different mural because I actually got to know the community during the course of that time. And it was, the stories were so much richer and so much deeper. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you also do the best you can. So in the time, limited time, it's not easy to make a
Yeah.
living, you know.
Yeah. It sounds like a very, very involved process, which makes
Yeah.
me feel like you have to be prepared for that, or you almost have to like educate the people asking you to do the mural in a sense. I'm curious to know then how you how you choose your projects or whether or not there's a
Hmm.
big struggle with um like what you take on or what you don't take on
Yeah.
because like I feel like if there's yeah, it would be hard for me to communicate that to an institution to be like, oh, this
Yeah.
is the way we need to do it.
Yeah.
Um, do you
Yeah.
have,
No, I
I
mean, and
mean,
I think, yeah. Well, yeah. And I think that like the work life balance, you have two kids, I have one daughter, and it's like, it is totally different now, and I will be 45 in a couple weeks, and I've done like I don't know how many murals, but some more than 80 murals all over, but probably 72 of those murals I did before my daughter was born, and all
mhm,
of the murals I've done since she was born are all very local. One of them was very lucky that it was at this foundation, like walking distance from my house. And then during COVID, I've been painting interior murals on wood panels at my studio. So, you know, one thing now, like back in, before I had a family of my own, murals, I would choose them based on who the community partner was and what the work was that they were doing, and if I felt aligned and if I could do it with my schedule. So like stuff that I cared about. A lot of this stuff, I'm very interested in working with people who are impacted by incarceration. I'm very interested in like working in schools, and so kind of like supporting teachers who are like, if we look at Chris, like slides 7, 8, 9, and 10, like doing collaborative projects with students in schools to kind of create like living school environments. I'm really into that. But the next one, um, yeah. So, and these are like where students can kind of like reframe. Like I painted all of these. We can go through all 4 of them, but in collaboration with the students and teachers of these environments. And I did 4 classrooms, but just like projects that make sense in terms of content, partner, schedule, budget, all of those things. Now it's tougher because so now I'm like, luckily, like my next big project is also really local. I don't know when I'll do travel stuff again, but I also feel like there's so many muralists now. 15 years ago there weren't as many muralists. And granted, a lot of the people doing murals right now are more from like a colonial like vibe where they just want to go in and kind of like paint their own thing and then leave without really any interaction with the community. But there are a lot of really good muralists out there, like who are really invested in the community. So I don't feel like I need to travel that much because there are people everywhere who can do this. Like I don't need to come to Portland to paint because you're there. And like, you know, um, but for me, a lot of the travel projects that I've done, it's benefited me. It's been like great collaboration with the community, but I think that those are like trips that are more like they help me grow as an artist. Just especially projects that are like so like if we look at Chris, like 16 and 17, um those projects are like projects that are part of like kind of like mural festivals, where they have you come. This is in Sevilla in Spain. They have you come for a few weeks. There's a theme. This was like globalization, and mine was about like the impact on the environment and stuff and displacement. But you're there for 2 weeks and there are all these other artists there. And so there's no other cooks in the kitchen. Visually, you get to paint whatever you want. We can go to the next one too. And so there's a lot more like artistic freedom because like when I'm doing the projects that are very embedded in the community, it's like there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So you're answering to a lot of people in terms of your design. And a lot of people aren't artists. They're not necessarily as visual of thinkers, but they definitely like weigh in heavily on what the design should be. So there's like a lot of compromise to a lot of those designs, which I'm fine with. Honestly, like my most meaningful murals are not the ones that I think aesthetically have turned out the best, but they're the ones that I care about the most, which is like an interesting thing, like it's not just like me painting what I think is going to look the best, but it's, yeah. So the travel ones are just, except for this one, number 3, like where I felt like that one was, this was at the Japanese American National Museum in LA. I felt like that was a really special project just because it's like there aren't so many Japanese American muralists, so I felt like really honored to be able to do this one at such a special place, like for me and my family. But yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to balance, but I feel like, yeah, one time I did an author visit to a school in Texas, and I was like showing a lot of my mural work, and a teacher afterwards, she said, "You don't have any kids, do you?" And I was like, "No, I don't." This was, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, and she was like, "Yeah," she was like, "That would be impossible." And now I totally get what she means. Um, I had this idea that I would like strap my baby on my back and just paint together, and I'm like, that would never work. That would
Yeah,
never work. Not for my
that,
daughter. Yeah.
that was my whole career.
Um,
I had my daughter with me the whole time
the whole
that
time.
I was
Amazing.
painting. My first community mural was based on my daughter, and when I did my community engagement, I had the community interact with her. But they were people that we knew and people that we were familiar with. So it was a story about how the community helps to raise her as well. But Yeah, it's a crazy balance for me, and I feel like um I have to scale down a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm really fortunate to have I wouldn't be doing murals if it weren't for like having kids, because I
Mm,
basically dropped everything to watch the kids, and then when opportunities of mural making arose, I just jumped at it, and then like I
yeah.
was able to start a career. But definitely it's opened up a lot of doors for me, but at the same time I feel like it's something that I'm not going to be able to balance. I think nowadays I'm just trying to keep it light and then do things that I feel like are meaningful. And then
Yeah.
I think the expectations are just like, not, I mean, I'm glad we're having this conversation because it's very inspiring to me, but it's been a difficult time for me. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know if you've kind of talked about it, obviously, your balance, but where does that change your art practice now that you have a young child?
Oh yeah. I mean, like completely. Like I used to work late. I used to like work till 2 in the morning, and just like now I am on such a kind of regimented style, and it is like these are the hours that I'm going to like be in creative space. You know, it is literally from 9 until sometime between 3 and 5. You know, and it sometimes I'll work in the evening, but you know, it's like um the life becomes bigger too. You know, and so I luckily now the books are a little bit more amenable to like having a kid, just because there's not like travel and there's not so much logistics. You know, murals have so many logistics, but yeah, it is very tough, you know. And it's like I've had like in my family we've had a certain amount, everybody, but like a lot of trauma in the last like uh, you
Mhm.
know, few years. And so it's also just kind of like how do you how do you just balance everything and take care of your family and take care of yourself and like be healthy, because you also want to go into these projects with a lot of like love and feeling healthy. You know, you don't want to bring, you know, like stress of, you know, because it's also an incredible privilege to do this kind of work. So it's like
Mhm.
um I just try to like keep that. I mean, working in community though is just like keeps things in constant perspective. So, but I do think that like there's an emotional element to it, just like the kind of um like discipline of just getting to the studio and being like, you have to like just train your mind that like now I'm going to be creative even if you're not actually in that space. Like my best creative thinking used to happen between like 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. and that's just not an option anymore, you know. But yeah, I it's hard, and it's also hard on your body. Like I don't know about you, but like, and every muralist I know over 40 has like major back problems. So I definitely I'm trying to attend to that too, because childbirth was also like, it's just how do you hold it all together so that this can be like, I have a big mural in the spring and I'm like, I just hope my back is good enough to do it. You know, it's it's tough. It's hard work. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think like right now, luckily, you know, some of these projects we can look at, Chris, 14 and 15. um, I've been able to like get some jobs where um, there's like more significant funding, so I can hire like a team. So I did this project, my first project back after having my daughter. This is one of 8 walls, so it's like a 8,000 square foot mural. And it was the first day, you know, as my daughter was like, she was like 15 months old or something, and the first day I threw, both my knees went out. But I had
Oh.
this amazing team, you know, like because we had to prime this whole wall. I mean, these are just 2 walls of the 8, but it was such a massive project. It took 2 years to do, a lot because of New York weather. But yeah, it like it's like an incredible luxury to have like a partner who can fund a project where you can have a real team and you can take your time. But yeah, it's like you have to take care of yourself. My body was like falling apart every single day on that project for the beginning. So take care
Yeah,
of your
I
backs,
appreciate
young
that. And
muralists. Yeah.
that is a huge inspiration to see that you did that at that stage of
Oh my
having
God.
a kid. So
I
congratulations. That's
like,
like
yeah, I mean,
fantastic.
it was like, the thing was, it's a 10-minute walk from home. So that was like, that made it totally possible. I'd like drop her off at daycare and then walk down and then, you know, like, but I had a team. So it's like, if you can have a team, I
Right.
think it's just like good to like, I would say one takeaway, and we're going to stop for questions, but like when it comes to funding projects, it's good to look at diverse sources because arts organizations have a certain budget, but they're doing all
Mhm.
of these important projects. But it's like, who can you partner with? Like, what agencies who have a shared common interest and will also benefit from this project and will have a separate budget so that they can make the project more meaningful. So, if it's like a community project on diversity, what are the community agencies in that neighborhood who are going to support it, or like local businesses who would feel like, I care that like this wall is beautiful and that this wall represents this community that I love. Like, so it's like just looking for diverse funding so that you can have a more meaningful experience with the project, and you can do better work and you can have more support. It's like
I
help.
appreciate this.
It's
This is,
like,
I mean, for me, this is almost like a form of therapy. So I really appreciate
anytime,
your
Alex,
feedback. Yeah.
anytime, free therapy anytime, you have my number.
Yeah. So I mean, I know that it's coming. We have like maybe 10 minutes left. Should we go into a question and answer period to see if anyone has any questions for us?
Yeah.
Sal, I just want to first offer my thanks. Maybe you want to do that piece, Salvador, but I mean, I could just keep listening to both of you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really wonderful to hear both of you talk about, I mean, obviously the incredible work that you both do and the journey that got you to this place. But I think what's really, really interesting, and especially as we've been doing this series, is hearing the community engagement aspects of what you
Yeah.
do and really discussing what that means. Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions or just mystery around what that means. And yet it's something, right, that consistently gets
Yeah.
asked for,
Mm-hmm.
but there's not real uh, the conversation's not as mainstream or as stream, uh, as deep as it should be. And so, like, I
Yeah.
really appreciate hearing the approach that Katie you've been outlining, but also to Alex. Like, I know that's something that you've been doing so much of those last few years, and it's just really incredible. I think to hear that and share that with other folks who either are being asked it or are curious about it.
Mm-hmm. I think that, and I don't mean to just keep talking about money, but I think what it comes down to also is just supporting the artist in a way, in a meaningful way, so that they can do the good work, that they can actually take the time that they need. And for some reason, this happens in children's books too. Like, but when people, especially artists, are doing work for the community or for a friend or for the children, for some reason, people think that it should be free,
Yeah,
and that's just so
yeah,
wrong. That's just, so I think that like that's something that like it's good to just have that out on the table, because I also think artists are generally, and I always have been too, super uncomfortable to talk about money. But sometimes when you look at the hours that you spend on any one project and then you just think about what your hourly rate is, it is very depressing, and it's not what you would ever ask of anybody else. So I think it's worthwhile to just have it out there.
Do you actually? I have a question for both of you, and I know this varies on a number of factors, but like, what I think it would be interesting for the audience and folks who view this to hear. I get asked often, right, from artists, like, how should I set my rate, and
Yeah.
how does that, like, the number that they land on, like, how is that informed, what informs that, um, and I just be curious to hear from both of you, like, how do you set your rate and what kind of factors are you thinking about when you are putting that out there to prospective
Yeah.
clients or community organizations. And
Alex, do you want to go first?
Well, I feel like that's kind of a big question for me that I'm still trying to figure out. So, like, I I feel like I was very fortunate to have started Murals working with well, TriMet. It was like a transportation company. So it was a very well funded project, and basically I'll put it out there. It was like a 40 the it was like a $40,000 project, but it was like
Mm-hmm.
nine separate walls, nine separate images that I painted. And I worked on it for 2 months, and that's just painting. It didn't even include the planning process, so it was a really
Right.
like highly engaged process. But after that, because I was just a stay-at-home dad, and because I feel like it was just allowing me to create art, I just did a bunch of really like low or no pay, like it just wasn't paid,
Mm-hmm.
just because I really wanted to build that portfolio. And it was just balancing that. And then I found out that there was a lot of there trust that I had for the community. If they wanted it, they would raise money, and money would
Yeah.
come in. But then I think I'm getting to that point where it's a balance of like well-paid jobs because they know that I have the ability to do it, but I just go with what they're offering, and I just take whatever
Mm-hmm.
comes at me.
Yeah.
And I think right now it's like I have a problem saying no to people, and I say yes to too much. And for me, it's a survival mechanism. If I have work
Mm-hmm.
ahead of me, then I'll be able to
Yeah.
survive. But last year, it got to the point where I did so many projects that were not funded or underfunded that when
Mm-hmm.
I did my taxes, it really like hurt me and our family with
Yeah.
like how much I was making. So that's where I'm trying to step back right now, analyze the
Mm-hmm.
process, and have a contract, and have like expectations for whoever I'm working with in order to be fair to myself. So
Yeah.
it's a different process for me right now. It's not the same as it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely relate to all of that. And I feel like I started off doing murals for free, and I still do murals for free, periodically if it's something that it's more like that first number one slide was just when Trayvon Martin, when George Zimmerman was acquitted, I did a mural about Trayvon Martin. And, but those are like, or if it's like for, I have a like school in Detroit that I'm super close with, and I'll like, that's okay. That, but that's okay. Wait,
Oh,
um,
yeah. Go ahead, Katie.
okay,
We're having technical things on our side, but
okay.
he's talking to
Oh, that's
someone else.
okay.
Go ahead.
Hey, Chris,
So
you are
yeah,
not muted.
um, that's okay. But I think that like I also, Alex, will, if I'm working for like a partner, like when I do murals for foundations, if they're like a very wealthy foundation, I will charge them a lot, and then I'll use that money for other things, and I'll order a lot of paint, and then I'll donate that paint to like artists who are doing like projects for very low money, or like all to like the Black Lives Matter movement for the protest art or whatever, so it's kind of like um, distributing the funds between projects. But I think that like there are different ways you can do it, but I think that for an artist, when you're thinking about how to charge, think about how long it's going to take you, but not just to paint the mural. Think about how long the planning is going to take, how long the administration is going to take, how long the painting's going to take, and like whatever like promo or whatever you have to do around it. Then think about how long you've been doing it. Are you 2 years in, or are you 20 years in? Think about how long is the mural supposed to be up? Is it supposed to be up for 25 years, or is it going to be up for 1 month? Um, Definitely count for every single material. And then if you're going to have assistants, you need to be able to pay your assistants well. The assistants, it really matters that they're also paid at least a living wage. So it ends up being really expensive, but to me it's like, and I know that I have like a certain luxury now because I've been doing this for a long time, so I like have a little bit more mobility with negotiating, but like um I think it's like important to just put it out there. I always wonder, I'm like, if you had a master's degree or a bachelor's degree, or if you were like 15 years into your career, how much would you expect to get paid for 3 months of work? $3,000, really? Because that puts you at $12,000 a year. Put that at, then try to figure out what, if you were getting paid that much for your whole year, what does that put you at? And try to think of something fair. I always would, in like, my first probably 10 years, I would always compare myself, because I had a master's degree the whole time, but I would compare myself to a public school teacher. What do they get paid? Okay, including their benefits, because I certainly don't get benefits as a muralist. So then, how do I charge a mural compared to a public school teacher with a master's degree? That's kind of how I would plan it. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It took me a long time to kind of break apart what my budget was going to go into,
Mm-hmm.
even. And with bigger
Yeah.
projects, it's easier to know that you're going to have to charge for that. I think for me, in my inexperience, like if you hire anyone to do anything, especially if it's like installation or engineering or
Yeah.
that sort of a thing,
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's a
So
lot. It's
expensive.
way
Oh yeah.
more than
Yeah.
I would have expected. So I think
Yeah.
for me, like I feel like these are the things that make me stronger. And I've been doing murals for about 5 years professionally. So I feel like I'm
Mm-hmm.
excited to continue. And as my kids grow older, and this might be some help for you, but as the kids grow older and they're in school and things are getting taken care of, it's a lot easier to keep
Yeah.
functioning. And I'm sure that you kind of see that. How old is your
Yeah.
kid right
She's
now?
4. She's 4, so
Okay.
she's in pre-K. Yeah, so it's good. But especially like as long as school stays open, knock on all the wood.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Hey, I'm
But
yeah, it
gonna jump
is.
in if I can. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
you guys are bringing us to another question we have, and if it's okay, I just want to keep us a little bit aware of time. If it's
Yeah,
okay to
yeah.
end with this question,
Mm-hmm.
we just would love to hear from both of you. You're sort of getting to this, but what projects are you looking forward to, or what's next for you? What's next on the horizon, whether it's in the coming months or in the coming years, or maybe what would you dream of doing in that amount of time?
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Alex?
sure.
Okay.
Um, I have a few projects that I'm working on. The one that I'm most excited about is a 2 month residency at the Chinatown Museum in downtown.
Oh, nice.
So there's a lot of freedom in it. It's just an exploration, and this is kind of all of my projects beforehand were explorations of other communities, like the schools and well, there's like a particular community that I'm catered towards, but I feel like this one I get to be a little bit more self-reflexive, and then also analyze my own history and my own background. So and there's no stipulations for what the project has to be, except for reflecting upon what they display in the museum. But I think that because I get to focus on my own history, it'll be it'll be new for me, and I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Congrats on
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that is awesome. Um, for me, I'm starting a kind of a partnership that will go for the next 3 years with this group called the Women in Justice Project. And they're a New York based organization that works to kind of end mass incarceration of women, but they also like just do really specific work around community, like women who are incarcerated and the communities that they touch, like their families, their children, their neighborhoods and stuff. So we're kind of like uh, developing some kind of like visual campaign that's going to involve also like a like interview audio component, like a kind of poster campaign. But I think it's like a storytelling component. But it's all kind of in the early stages. But it has a lot to do with this what we were talking about before of like people having the opportunity to see each other more clearly. Um, so that's kind of like long term, but in the short term, I have a book that's coming out in a few weeks called Dad Bakes, and it's about a father and the daughter, and they're kind of it's just kind of like them spending a day together, and it's a really simple story. But at the end of the story, like in the author's note, you find out that the father was formerly incarcerated, so he works as a baker. But the whole point of the story was that like he's this complete person who has all of these pieces that make him a complete human being, and so it's like getting to know him as that complete person before you like deepen his story with the information in the author's note. But I've been working on fundraising to like get get the book to be donated to a lot of like parenting programs that are in correctional facilities, and a lot of reentry programs, and a lot of groups that work with children who have a parent who's incarcerated. So that's like right now, and I'm super excited about that. So
That's
That's
amazing.
fabulous. Yeah.
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 And I want to remind folks that we have tagged you guys, both of you, on our social media, in our posts, and um, in our different communications. We've sent out your websites, and I will do that again after this when we share this video. So if anyone missed it, they can grab it. But I really want to point people to your work and to the places where you're sharing it regularly, and so that we can follow those upcoming projects. Thanks so much for sharing.
thanks for having
Yeah.
us. This has
Yeah.
been
Oh
such a
yeah.
wonderful conversation. I love talking to you guys, even just in the tech checks. It's been so nice.
Well, it
Yeah,
is really our honor to host both of you tonight.
Katie, it's
Yeah.
been like a dream to meet someone I'm so inspired by, and I feel like this conversation went very well. So thank you so much.
Same here. And just call me anytime you need a mural therapy session. I'll be like your mural therapist happily.
I appreciate it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I love it. Thanks, both of you.
I
And
love,
thank you so much,
yes.
Salvador, too, and Open Signal for producing this event for us tonight. And to our ASL interpreters and our live caption um, person, thank you all. And thanks so much for joining us. To all our viewers and those of you who tuned in and left comments, Alex and Katie, I'll send you the kind, encouraging comments people dropped you during this. It's really nice to engage together this way. So thanks to all of you. Thanks, Alex and Katie, again. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Thursday.
You too.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.